Hello everyone, it's Mr. Sean with a quick hit for chapter 3 dealing with communication and the self. And this particular chapter and this quick hit is focusing on our self-concept and our self-esteem, how we see ourselves. Every single one of us listening to this quick hit, we all see ourselves differently, and that's based upon different interactions that we've come across and different things that we've communicated with other people. And for some of us, the way that you see yourself is based on the information that you haven't communicated to other people. But when you come across self-concept and self-esteem, the difference between the two is very simple. Self-concept is just how you see yourself, the image you see yourself, whereas self-esteem is how valuable you believe yourself to be. You can have higher self-esteem in certain situations than you can in others. For example, you might deem yourself to be very valuable at work because you know what to do in every situation. The workplace couldn't function without you, but you might not see yourself as valuable in the relationship. Maybe you're dating or you're married to or you're seeing someone that is of a higher status than you when it comes to employment. Maybe something has come up in conversation for you to believe that you are less valuable than that particular person. So self-esteem plays a role in self-concept because depending on how valuable you believe yourself to be in certain situations and maybe more or less valuable in other situations, that can control or have some sort of influence over how the overall image that you see for yourself. But we really don't know who we are until other people tell us about ourselves. Think of it this way. You have no idea that you're good or bad at something until people tell you that. This is what we call the reflected appraisals. We just see ourselves in the way others see us. The example I always give, think of the top athletes in the world today. LeBron James, Jose Altuve, Serena, Michael Phelps, things of those, any athlete that you can think of. How did they know that they were as great as they are at their sport? They didn't know that they were great until other people said, hey, you're pretty good at this, you need to keep going. Similarly, reflected appraisals can also be negative because other people can sabotage us and say, actually, you're not as good at this as you think you are. You probably need to find something else. And then you go on believing, I'm not good here or I'm not good at this, when in reality, you actually are. And sometimes our self-concept and self-esteem can be developed and can be constructed based upon us comparing ourselves with other people. And I caution you when doing this. We do this both consciously and subconsciously. Think of it like this. When you log into Facebook or even Instagram's big on this now, or at least the Instagram friends I'm friends with, they always post pictures of, I have one friend, he and his wife and little son live in San Antonio, but they travel all the time. I feel like they pull the little kid out of school constantly so they can go on trips. And they're in Barbados, and they're in Turks and Caicos, and they're in Italy, and they're in Hawaii, and things of that nature. So when social comparison comes into play, we can look at situations like this, especially social media, and say, oh, my life isn't nearly as great as this person because they do this, and they go on these trips, and they just bought this. And that's not necessarily the case. As we know with social media, sometimes we can only put up or post the good pictures to create this image of us that makes it seem like this is who we are, this is what our life is. So when we talk about this idea of social comparison, we can compare ourselves to others who are similar to us. And I mean that they're similar to us, they're on our level. We're not gonna, when I say we, I'm talking about you as well. We're not socially comparing ourselves to Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, things of that nature. So when you talk about social comparison, do you have the same amount of Facebook and Instagram friends and followers as maybe your friend does? And if you do or if you don't, does that influence your self-concept and your self-esteem? When we talk about communication in the self as well, our gender plays a role here and our identity. Whether you are male or female, or whether you identify as male or female, plays a role in how you view yourself, plays a role in whether you have a strong self-concept and self-esteem, or whether your self-concept and self-esteem is very low. One of the pictures that you see here, Bruce Jenner turning into Caitlyn Jenner, Think about it like this. Bruce Jenner was a world-class Olympian back in the 70s. No, I was not alive then. But he was an Olympic runner, one of the more popular athletes. He was almost like the LeBron James of the 70s. And the United States the morale was low in the 70s. And so no matter what your background, your ethnicity, your political leanings were, when Bruce Jenner was running in the Olympics, everybody was paying attention. He was essentially putting the nation on his back, because he was carrying around this idea that we can coalesce around a winner, and sports has that hold on the United States like that. And that's for another lecture. I could go on and on about how sports can coalesce people of all different backgrounds and make us increase morale. But Bruce Jenner was like the LeBron James of his time, but deep inside, he had always knew he wanted to be identified as Caitlyn Jenner, but he couldn't because of various reasons. Number one, you're a top athlete. Number two, it's the 70s. It wasn't as socially accepted back then, things of that nature. So you can better believe that because he was conflicted here, because he wasn't able to live the life the way he wanted to live it, that this had an influence on his self-concept and his self-esteem and his sense of self, of who he really was as a person. And this played a role in his communication abilities with people of various natures, whether that's in relationships, whether that's with family members, whether that's with the media and sports, things of that nature. So when we talk about this idea of gender norms, gender roles, what I want you to be aware of is all of this is socially constructed. What socially constructed means is it's constructed by society. Society has constructed this idea of what it should be, but there is no rule, there is no law, it is not set in stone that you have to be what society wants you to be. Gender norms, what's normal, and I'm using air quotes here, what's normal for that specific gender, male or female, gender roles, the role that each gender plays in that specific society. However, as I've said before, socially constructed, there's no rule or law that says because you are born this, you have to identify as this. And that's where communication and the self comes into play, especially when it comes to gender and identity. There are thousands, possibly millions of people in this world and in the United States today who have low self-concept and low self-esteem because society is saying, no, because you were born this, you have to act like this, when in reality, there's no law or no rule that says that to be true. When we talk about communication and the self, understand that you have three different interpersonal needs: the need for control, inclusion, and affection. And I want you to pay close attention to this while reading your text. The three needs, you could probably figure out which one of these you have a higher need for. Some of you have high control needs, meaning the ability to make decisions. So you probably make decisions a lot for you and your partner in relationships. You like to be in control of the decision making. Need for inclusion, that includes that friend or you who just has to be around people. I always say it's the person that can't be alone or can't not be in a relationship. I have a friend, and the minute he gets out of one relationship, 30 minutes later he's in another. That's high inclusion needs. And then the need for affection, to give or appreciate love. Your need increases or decreases based upon the relationship. And it increases the need for control, inclusion, or affection. Either one of these, it increases or decreases based upon your self-concept and your self-esteem, how you see yourself in that particular relationship. But on the opposite end of that, we have impression management, which is our ability to act a certain way and project a certain image towards other people or other groups. Every single one of us listening to this quick hit, myself included, who's making this quick hit, we all engage in impression management, meaning we all project a certain image towards certain people or towards certain individuals based upon that communication context. You manage a different identity depending upon who it is that you're talking to or what type of relationship you are engaging in. For example, the identity that I manage for when I'm at work is not the same identity I manage in front of my friends. It's not the same one I manage or the same one I project in front of my family members, things of that nature. And you communicate differently online than you do in face-to-face situations with those different groups, whether that's your family, your friends, or your workplace. And doing this is totally normal. It goes back to communication accommodation theory that we discussed in Quick Hit Chapter 1. When you talk about this idea of managing identities, you want to manage the identity in a certain way amongst your friends and your family and your coworkers because you're trying to create some sort of relationship there to where the relationship is where you want it to be. Not only that, how confident you are in your self-concept and your self-esteem when it comes to that particular communication context. And then finally, part of this chapter is self-disclosure. Remember, self-disclosure is purposely revealing information about ourselves to other people. And the whole point of this is to increase the relationship, increase the possibility of this relationship, and in some instances, increase intimacy in the relationship as well. Not everything we reveal, though, can be considered self-disclosure. If you're just revealing your favorite color as burnt orange, that's not self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is you're purposely revealing intentional information in order to build the relationship. So when we talk about self-disclosure, though, first things first, there's two things I want you to pay attention to here. Number one, it has to be reciprocal. And what I mean by that is this. If you're revealing personal information in order to build a relationship, the other person can't just not do it. I mean, yeah, they can just not do it, but the chances of that relationship going anywhere are slim to none. If you have one person that over self-discloses and the other person doesn't self-disclose at all, there's a high possibility that that relationship is probably not going to work out. So when you do self-disclose, you're under the impression I'm self-disclosing information about myself to build a relationship here, so I need you to self-disclose in order to help build the relationship as well, which is why it's risky to do so. It's risky to do so because there's no guarantee that the other person is going to self-disclose, but it's also risky because there's a possibility that whatever you self-disclose could be used against you somewhere down the line. But understand that we gradually, it's not just hey, this is our first date, let's just throw everything out there. It's a gradual process. And we're going to talk about uncertainty reduction theory. I'm sorry, not uncertainty reduction theory, social penetration theory. Later on in this semester, social penetration theory shows us how and why we self-disclose, the 4 different levels of self-disclosure in order to build a relationship. So that's your quick hit for Chapter 3, dealing with communication and the self. And as always, if you have any questions or want me to explain something further, please do not hesitate to ask.